Hi, in this video we are going to be looking at two very important tools in the software development world, which is Git and GitHub. If you are a developer and you've never heard of these technologies before, or you've heard of them but have never used nor understand the basis of using them, this video is for you. So let's take a look at what Git is and why we need it. Git, like any other version control system, is used for tracking changes in computer files. With Git, we can track any type of file, irrespective of the programming language or the framework used in creating that file. So be it a Python, C#, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, or any type of file at all, Git can track it. Of course, unless you decide not to, using a special file named git ignore. We'll talk more about this later. Git, being a distributed version control system, means that multiple persons, in this case developers, can work on the same project or repository without being on the same network. Now, there are other version control systems where developers have to be connected to the same network to work on a project. This kind of version control systems are called centralized version control system. On the other hand, Git is a decentralized version control system or a distributed version control system, which means developers don't have to be connected to the same network to work on the same projects. One of the common reasons why developers use Git or any version control system at all is because they help track changes made on files. So it is easy to know who made a change and when the change was made. Git also makes reverting a file back at any time easy. You can even revert an entire project or a repo. So let's say you had a working project, but then you implemented a new feature that causes the code to break. It is easy to revert that project back to a point where it was working fine. Git also makes collaboration between developers easy. It allows multiple developers' code to be merged into one source. So you have a lot of developers working on different features of a program, and at the end of the day, all their code will be merged into one source. With Git, your project is always available on your local PC, and is also available online if you push it to a remote repository, which is where GitHub comes in. And currently, Git is the most commonly used version control system in the world. So if you write code that is only available to you, or you work as part of a team, Git is a very useful tool. Next, we want to quickly look at some of Git's basic commands. Now, to actually perform operations in Git, there are some commands you need to write. Although there are a lot of them, but I've put together some of the commonly used Git commands. The first one is git init. We use git init to initialize a Git repository locally. So when you just have a project that is currently not being tracked by Git and you want Git to start tracking files in that project, you use git init. Next, we have git add. This add files from the working directory to the staging area. Next, we have git status. This checks for the status of files within the working directory. That way you can know which files is currently in the staging area or which files we have moved to the working directory. We have git push next, So we use git commit to commit changes in the staging area to the local repository. Now, using the git commit, you can actually pass in a message saying what exactly you changed in the file. We have git push next. Now, we use this to push files in a local repository to a remote repository like GitHub. And then we have git pull. We use git pull to pull the latest changes from a remote repository down to our local repository. So like I said, when you have multiple developers working on the same project and someone has made some changes and pushed it to a remote repository, before you can actually continue working, you would want to pull these changes from the remote repository to your local repository, and you do that using git pull. And lastly, we have git clone. Now, when you find a project online, probably a library that you like, and you want to copy it to your system, or you want to clone it to your PC, you use git clone. Next, we are going to go ahead to set up and install Git. To download Git, you can go to git-scm.com, or you can search the term Git on any of the search engines, and the first option you should get should be a link to the Git homepage. After downloading and installing Git, we'll then go ahead to set up some of Git's global configuration values. Alright, we want to go ahead and download Git now, and you can just start up any of your browsers, and then to download Git, as we have discussed, you can go to git-scm.com, and that should take you to the Git homepage, or you simply go to any of your search engine and just search for Git, and the first link you get should be a link to download Git. So but when you get to the home page, just scroll down, you should see the download section. Click on this link, and that should bring you to this page. Now we are being given the options to download for Mac OS, Windows, Linux. Since I'm on the Windows PC, I will click on the Windows download link, but if you're on the Mac or Linux, go ahead and click on any of them. So I'll click on Windows. This will go ahead and start downloading Git to your device, but I already have that downloaded, so I'll stop the download. You should go ahead and download it. And if for some reason your downloads does not start when you get to this page, you can click here to download manually. Alright, so when the download is done, we'll now go ahead now to do the installation and the setup. Alright, we Git downloaded now. Let's go ahead and run the installation file. Yes, we're just going to be doing a basic installation, so I won't be changing anything here. Next. Just leave the default settings for now. Next. That is okay. Next. That is okay also. So next, and just click on the install button. Alright, now that the installation is done, okay, we'll go ahead and launch Git Bash. Let's uncheck this. Git Bash is an environment just like the Windows command prompt where we can write Git commands. Okay, but before we go ahead and run that, let's bring up our command prompt, type in cmd. We want to confirm if Git is already installed on this machine, on our machine. So we type in git --version. Alright, and that's it. Git is installed. Okay, now you can use this command prompt to run your Git commands, okay, but I prefer the Git Bash over that. So we'll come back here, click on finish, and this is the Git Bash. Okay, we can still type in the command we type in just now, git --version, and that still works. Okay, for the sake, let me just enlarge this so you can see that. Now that we have Git installed on our system and it's running fine, the next thing we are going to do now is set up two Git global configuration values, our username and our email. Now this is important because in the case where you have two or more developers working on the same project or repo and everyone is making changes, it becomes easy for us to know who made the change at a particular point in time. Now what Git does is it takes these values we are setting and then use them to set the author for every commit we make from our system. Okay, from your own PC, it takes those values, and for every commit you make to any repo, it sets the author of that commit using your username and the email you set. Now to set that, we are going to write a Git command. Now every Git command we are going to be writing, we will be starting with Git followed by the verb, or in this case the action, that is what you want to do. So git config --global, okay, user.name to set the username, then you pass in the username as a string. In this case, just passing your name or whatever username you want to use. Hit the enter key. To set up your email is still the same command, but instead of user.name, you use user.email. User.email, you pass in your email, okay, and when you're done, you hit the enter key again. Now, we are done setting these values. To be sure that they've been set, we can confirm that by passing in the same command, but this time we will not pass in a value to them. So just do git config -- global user.email, hit enter, and you see we get the email. To get the username, do user.name, and we also get the username. To start using Git, you are always going to find yourself in one of these two possible scenarios. The first one is to initialize a repository from existing code. Let's say you already have an existing code, or you're about starting a project and you want to initialize Git to keep track of the files in that project. All you have to do is to initialize the repository by running the git init in that project folder. The second scenario is there is a repository already online, probably in a GitHub repository or a Bitbucket repository, and all you want to do is clone it to your local PC to work on it locally. Now, when you are cloning a remote repository, I'm pretty sure that remote repository has already been initialized, so you don't have to run the git init command on it again. So we are going to take this one after the other. We'll first initialize the repository from existing code. So we'll go to our system right now, create some files, and initialize the Git repository in it, and see how we can use Git. Now, to start using Git, what I want to do now is create an empty folder first. Let's say the name of this project I want to create is user 360. Okay, and inside the user 360 we'll have a code file, and let's say it's a web app, so I'll create an index, not a folder. I'll create an index.html file. I need a test file, so index.html. Of course, we can still use the command line or even git bash to create this file, but let me go ahead and create it there. And let's open this folder with VS Code, so we can see the code inside. Currently there is no code at all, so let me just write the basic HTML templates there. Good. So this is the code we have inside this index.html. Sorry. Now I want to start tracking the files inside this folder using Git. Okay, so to get started, all I have to do, all I have to do is bring up my git bash. Like I said, you can use the command line interface, the Windows command prompt, and if you're on a Linux or a Mac PC, you can use your default terminal. But I will go ahead and use the git bash that comes default with Windows. So here is it here. If you can see it, you can search git bash. Okay, that should go ahead and run the application, and there you have it. I'm just going to put it up here so we can see it and see the folder too, and here we have our code. Alright, now the first thing you want to do is to initialize a Git repository is first of all make sure you are on the folder where you want to initialize that repository. Okay, because currently I'm in my the users directory of my system, and if I go ahead and run git init now, it will initialize the Git repository on my users directory. So you have to make sure you are on that folder, you are inside the folder where you want to run Git, where you want to start tracking the files inside. Now my user 360 is in my desktop, so I have to browse to the desktop. To move to the desktop, all I have to do is do cd, that's change directory, do cd desktop, and you see that takes me to my desktop. Alright, now that I'm in my desktop, I know on my desktop I have a user 360 folder, so I also change to that directory, cd user 360, and you can see I'm already inside the folder now. To be sure that we are inside the folder, let's do a dir, which means to show the files inside the directory, and you see I have an index.html file in that directory. Like I said, using this command line, you can also create new files. Okay, you can create new files using this command line if you want to. For example, let me say I want to create a JS file in this same folder. Since I'm inside the folder, I can simply say touch. You should still be able to do this with Windows command prompt also. So I'll do touch app.js, and you see we have an app.js file in our folder already. Now let's go ahead and initialize a Git repository now. So let me just clear this. To clear this terminal, just type in clear to clear those commands out. So the first command we are going to be using, this is the first time we want to actually start tracking these files using Git. So we need to initialize a Git repository in this folder now. Please, I repeat again, make sure you are inside the folder where the files you want to track are. Okay, now to avoid any mistake for now, if you are not really that good using the terminal to move between directories, inside the folder you should be able to right click and see Git bash here. You see this option. Okay, when you right click on the folder, you will see Git bash here. When this opens, it will open Git directly. You see the Git app that came up, it would open Git directly in that directory. Okay, so you don't have to do all those cd stuff we are doing. So if you don't really know how to use the command line to move between directories, please use this option. Just go to the folder where the files are, right click and do Git bash here. That will go ahead and bring up Git bash. Now that reminds me, you notice we have a Git GUI here. That is a GUI interface Git gives us to also be that gives us the ability to still do the same thing we are doing on our Git bash, but it's just a GUI. Okay, I know some people would think that would be a bit better, but in a lot of organizations the Git bash terminal interface is more preferred. Okay, for now I would advise you don't even bother using that for now. Okay, I have never really used that before, and the only time I tried it, I really didn't see any need of why I should use that. Now to initialize Git in this repository now, the first thing we have to do, like we said, the very first thing you have to do is run git init. All right, git init. This will go ahead and create a Git folder in that directory. So let's go ahead and hit enter. You see this, it tells us that it initialized an empty repository in that location. Now if I come down to my view option, where is that option? Change folder search option. I can't really see what I'm looking for, so let me expand this a bit. Good. Currently you see the file name extension is hidden. Let's show hidden items. Good. Now you see that there is a folder created that is a .git folder. Now this is where whenever you run git init, it's going to go ahead and create this folder in that directory where your files are. Okay, now that shows now that Git has been initialized in this folder, in this project, and we can go ahead and start tracking the files in this folder using Git. All right, so all we need to do now, okay, to track the files there, don't forget I told you after initializing a Git repository, you also need to add the files to Git so that Git would know which files it should track. So to do that, all we need to do is run git. Like we said earlier, every Git command you're going to be writing would start with Git followed by the verb, that is what you want to do. So we'll go ahead and say git add. Before we run git add, let's do git status and see what happens. Let's do git status. Good. You see this, it tells you you've not made any commits yet, and it tells you we're on the main branch and we have some untracked files. We have the app.js and index.html. Okay, and now it's telling us nothing added to the commit, but untracked files are present, and we can use git add to add files to the staging area. Now we are currently in the working directory. Now we want to add files from the working directory now to the staging area. Now to add files, you do git add, okay, followed by the name of the file. So the file I want to first of all add is my index.html. So let's do an index.html, hit enter, and you see that though you don't get any feedback, but if we go ahead and run git status again, you see it tells you changes. We have a change to be committed, that we have a new file, index.html, and we still have an untracked file. So it's only currently tracking our index.html file and not our app.js file. To add that again, you can still go ahead and run git add, then app.js. But I know this will look somehow, because in a situation where you have like 10 to 20 different files, are you going to be adding all of them one after the other? Now when you want to add multiple files, there are actually options for that. To add multiple files, you can simply run git add, then dot. What this will do is it will go through the entire folder and add every file in that folder. You can also do git add star, okay, asterisk, and this will still go ahead and add all files in that folder. You know what I'll do? Let's go ahead again and create a new file, this time a CSS file. So this will be a touch let's say main.css. Now, like, though I know the files I'm creating are all web related, but like we said earlier, Git would run Git would be able to track any type of file, be it a Python, CS, C#, Java, or JavaScript file. So any type of file at all. Don't be confused by the fact that I'm just creating HTML web files alone. So touch main.css, and you see that went ahead now to create a new file. Now please, this code I wrote has nothing to do with Git, okay? It's just a code to create a file in the directory. So you see now we have a main.css file. Let me see if I can increase this font a little. So let's go to setting. Let me increase this font a little, probably use a 20. Alright, good, that's better. So we have a main.css file now. So if we run git status again, you see that it tells us we have two files that are currently on track. We have an app.js and a main.css file. Now, the last time we added our index.html file, we ran git add, then the name of the file, and that went ahead and added only the HTML file. This time I don't want to do that again, because like I said, we already have multiple files we want to add, and we can't just run git add for every one of them. So I'll do a git add dot and hit enter. You see that now that has gone ahead and added all the files, and of course we did not get a feedback, but let's do git status to check for the files that were added. And you see now the two files, main.css and app.js, have all been added now to our staging area. They've all been added now to our staging area. Now to make a commit now, okay, now we want to move these files that are in our staging area to our local repository. Okay, we want to commit this file. We use the order command git commit. Now there is, let's just go ahead and do this. So git commit, hit enter, and now you enter into this, I don't really know what I will call this, but whenever you do git commit and you don't pass in a message, you're supposed to pass in a message that is for the committed files. You're supposed to pass in a message on what you did, but we did not pass in that message, and that is why we got this. So whenever you run git commit, you're always going to be getting this window. Okay, so to now what this does is giving you the opportunity to write multi-line commit message. Okay, so to actually write a commit message, press I on your keyboard to enter insert mode, and you can then go ahead and write the commit you want to write. Since this is our very first commit, I'll just say initial commit. Okay, we just say initial commit. And to get out of this window, and this is why I don't really like this a lot, I just prefer doing my git commit and passing the message. To get out of this window, this is probably the most complicated thing about this git bash. Okay, to get out of the window, you have to press escape to escape from the insert mode, then :WQ and enter. Okay, that will take us away from that insert mode back to our normal and friendly git bash that we know. Alright, now you see that we get a message that 3 files have been changed and they've all been created. You have the names of the file app.js, index.html and main.css. Okay, now let's go ahead now. Git, like we said, we have initialized Git already, okay, and Git is already tracking our files. Now the next thing we want to do now is let's go make a change to one of these files. Now currently this is our index.html, and by the time we committed to GitHub, this was how the code was. But let's make a change. Let me add an h1 tag, okay, and say hello. All right, save that. Come back to our terminal now, to git bash, and do a git status. You see what we get? It tells us that a file has been modified, which is an index.html file. Now we should use git add or git commit -a to go ahead and commit these files. So all we have to do now is, since we've made changes to this file, we now need to commit it so that the changes we made will now reflect on our local repository. Currently it is not reflecting on it. So what we need to do now is do a git add, and of course I will just be doing a git add dot or ** to add all files. I don't really have time to always be typing the names of the file. That is one reason I like git add, then the dot. Hit enter. You see that the file has been entered, that has been added already, and then do a git. Before we do a git commit, let's do a git status and see what we get. You see, it tells you you have changes to be committed. All right, so you have added this file but you have not committed this. So let's do a git commit, and to avoid getting that insertion mode we got earlier, okay, where we had to type those weird commands, to avoid getting there, you can pass in a message directly here by doing git commit -m, which stands for message, then in quotation mark you pass in the message. So now the message you pass in to every commit should always be descriptive of what you did. That is, always passing message that would tell the other developers working on the project what exactly you did. So here I can say I added the h1 tag, although I know this is not really specific, but this is not a real project. But please, okay, messages you pass in for every commit should be descriptive of what you did. So hit enter, and you see one file has been changed and it has been inserted to our local repository. If we go ahead and do git status again, you see say nothing to commit. All right, our working directory is clean. Sometimes when working, there might be some files or some specific types of files that you don't want Git to track. This might be because you plan on pushing this code online and you don't want these files to be available on the online repository. All you need to do is create a special kind of file called a git ignore file. You can create it from your IDE, and of course you can use the git bash. I will go ahead and create it from my IDE. Now the name of the file should start with a dot. It's actually a .git ignore. So .git ignore, and then go ahead and save that. Now if I come back to my terminal and run the git status, you see that we get the file. Now let me create a file called password.txt. Now I don't want this password.txt to be tracked by Git. Currently if I run the git status, you see that Git is currently trying to track it. So what we can do is, in our git ignore file, just write out the name of the file you want Git to ignore. So password.txt, save that, Come back now, let's run a git status again. You see that file is not being tracked. You can also decide not to track a folder. So let me go ahead and create a new folder here, and I will call this documents or whatever it is. Now let's say inside this document I have other files. Let me say I have a log file. So let's say I have a log.txt file, okay, and some other files inside here. Now what I don't want Git to track this folder. So currently if you run a git status, you see that Git is trying to track the folder. So what we can do is in our git ignore file also add that folder. To add a folder, you use the /, then the name of the folder. Save this now. Let's run git status again and see what happens. You see we can't see the folder anymore. Now sometimes you might have the same types of file, more than one or two of them, and you want to add all of them together. You want to ignore all of them. For example, we currently have a password.txt. Let's say we also have another file called a log.txt. Notice we now have two txt files here, and I want to ignore them. Now instead of writing all their names separately, okay, instead of doing password.txt and log.txt, of course you will not even want Git to be tracking a logged file. Instead of doing this, you can simply tell Git to ignore anything with an extension of .txt. With an extension of .txt. If you come back now and do a git status, okay, sorry, you have to put asterisk there. So save this now. Come back, run a git status. You see that Git now is ignoring any file with a .txt extension. That is how you can ignore some files. Alright, with the changes and the comments we've made so far, we want to push our code to an online or a remote repository so that it can be available online. To do this, we will need GitHub. So open any of your favorite browser and go to github.com, and of course to create a remote repository on GitHub you need an account. I already have one, so I'll just go ahead and sign in. If you don't, you can click on sign up to create a new account, and that shouldn't take you more than a minute or two. So I'll click on sign in, and that will take me to the login page. I'll put in my details, click on sign in. This will, when your sign-in is done, it should take you to your dashboard where you should have this option to create a new repository. So just click on new, and you should be redirected to this page. On this page, what we are being asked for is our repository name. Try to always make sure that your repository name is the same name as your project. So I will enter the name of my repository. You can also add a description for your project. I will not do that. We have the option of making our repository public or private. If you make it public, it means anyone can have access to it, but if you make it private, just you. Also, we can add a readme file, which is just a file that would contain information about the project also. But for now, we'll leave that. We'll come back to that later. Also, you can add a git ignore file. We've already added one, so we don't need to check that option again. So just go ahead and click on create repository. Alright, now since we already have an existing repository, that is an existing local repository, the only thing we need to do now is copy this code here, the very first one. What this would do is it would connect your local repository to this online repository. So go to git bash, paste in that code. To paste in git bash, you right click, select paste, and then hit enter. This should connect it. Once you are connected, you can select the branch using this code, paste again, hit enter. that has been selected, and then to push the code online, that is what we need this last line of code for. To push our project online, paste this, which is git push, a command we have looked at, -u origin main, click enter. This should go ahead now and push our code from our local repository to our online repository. Now that is done, let's refresh this page and see what happens. As you can see now, we have all our files online, our app.js, index.js, and main.js, excluding those files we have told Git to ignore. If you can recall, earlier when we were creating this remote repository, GitHub gave us the option of adding a README file. A README file is just another special kind of file that you can use to include description about your project so that people who are interested in the project can read about it. You can go ahead and click on add a README file here to add a README file, but I like doing it from my IDE. So I'll come back to my IDE, create a new file, and name it readme. It should always be this name, okay? And name it readme.md. This extension is markdown. MD stands for markdown. You can browse online later to read more about it. I'll not go too in-depth on that. So I'll go ahead and add a brief description about this project now. Now that I have added this, I'll bring up my git bash and run git add dot to add all files. Okay, and then let's do a git status to check for the status. Alright, now we can do a git commit -m, and the message this time would be added a readme file. Had that. Let's go ahead and push this online now by doing the git push. This should go ahead now and push our code online again. So if you go ahead now, go to the browser, refresh your page, you see that your readme file has been pushed online, and you can see what it does for you. So it just displays that description you added to it. Alright, now there's something very important I want to point out. Let's go ahead and edit this HTML file again. Maybe add an H2 that will say Word, save this. Now let's commit, let's add the changes. So do a git add dot, okay, and if you do a git status now, see it tells us it has been modified, and we can do git commit -m to pass in the message, and in this case the message we want to pass now will be added h2 tag, hit enter, and that goes ahead and commit it. If we want to push this code again online, that is, we want to add, currently the remote repository is currently not updated with this new code we just added here. So if we want to push these latest changes to it, all we need to do is git push. Now that is what I wanted to point out. If you note, the very first time we did git push, that is when we created our remote repository, and we did git push to push these files online, what we did was we did something like, I think, let me just write the code instead of scrolling up looking for that. What we did was something like this. No, not that. What we did, I think we still have it. Yeah, let's copy this come back to our terminal. Let's paste that. This was what we did. Okay, so the very first time you are pushing your code online, that time you are just pushing it. Okay, you created the repository newly and you just want to push your local repository to the online repository. You use this command. Okay, but when you are done pushing for the very first time, and then later all you want to be pushing online is just the changes you made in your local repository. You know already your local repository is in sync with your remote repository, and all you just want to be pushing now are just the new latest changes you've made. Just do a git push. That's all you have to do. All right, git push. So you only have to write that git push -u main so once. Okay, when you are done with that, all you subsequent changes that you want to push online, you just simply use git push. All right, now that we are done initializing Git in an existing code, and we've pushed our code files online to a remote repository, we want to also look at how do we clone a remote repository. Cloning a remote repository means copying that repository to your local PC. So this might be your own repo, okay, or somebody else's repository. Maybe you found a project online that you really like and it is public. You can go ahead to clone it. So to clone a repository, one very important thing you need is the URL of the repository. Just click on code, then select which protocol you want to use to download. I'm using HTTP, so I'll select that. Click on copy, and you see the URL has been copied. I'll go back to my desktop. I've gone ahead and created a clone folder which is currently empty. This is where I want to clone the repository to. So I'll bring up git bash. Okay, and then before we go ahead and write the command to clone the repository, we want to change our directory to this clone folder. So do a cd, which is change directory. This is not a git command. Okay, cd change directory to desktop. All right, and then on the desktop go to the clone directory. So, and currently you see we are in our desktop, and then inside our clone. Then to write the command to clone a repository is git. Don't forget, every git command starts with git, then followed by the actual command itself or the action. So git clone. All right, now after git clone, you go ahead and paste the URL you copied. Something was wrong with that URL. Let's recopy this. Okay, bring up this again. Good, and then hit enter, and that is cloning the repository. That is taking time. Okay, it is done. Now if we go to that folder now or directory, you see that we have a user 360 folder, and inside we have all our code files and even the .git folder, which means that we have successfully cloned this repository now, and we can start working on it too. We can as well go ahead and open this with VS Code, and you see we have all our files. All right, so that is that. All right, to round up this video, let's quickly go through Git basic workflow so we can understand better how Git works. So when using Git, you're simply going to have a local repository, okay, and then we'll talk about the remote repository later. Let's focus on the local repository for now. So when you do a Git init in a folder or a directory where your code files are, and you initialize a new Git repo in that folder, okay, you're basically going to have three working stages, or three stages. All right, so the first is the working directory. You have your staging area and the local repository itself. So to move files from your working area, this area is where you're actually writing your code. Okay, to move files from your working area to the staging area, you use the command git add and then the name of the file. And of course, if you don't want to be adding files one after the other, you can do a git add dot or a git add asterisk, and that should automatically add all files from your working directory to your staging area. And then when you want to commit the files, okay, you want to move the files from the staging area to your local repository itself, you use a git commit. Of course, you know, when you just simply do a git commit in a git bash, that will take you to the insertion mode where you have to type all those weird commands to get yourself out. To just avoid that, do a git commit, all right, then -m and add the message of the commit. All right, don't forget, every message for each commit should be descriptive of what code you changed. And then we have our git status, okay, to check for status of files within our local directory, our local repository. So this will let you know which files you've added to the staging area, which files you've not committed yet. And of course, to push your code online, you need a remote repository setup first. All right, so once you go ahead and set up a remote repository and you synchronize your local repository with your remote repository, you can then do a git push. Okay, that will go ahead and push your code to the remote repository. And if for some reason your remote repository has some latest changes that your local repository doesn't, you do a git pull. This will go ahead and pull the changes in your remote repository to your local repository. We also have the git checkout and the git merge command. We use these commands when working with branches, when we want to create branch and merge branch in Git. Although we did not cover that in this video, but when you're comfortable with the commands we've discussed in this video, I would advise you look up working with branches in Git. Alright, thanks for watching this.